The year was 1923, a time when the world was still filled with blank spaces on the map, regions whispered about but never fully explored. Java, in particular, was one of those places, a land of ancient jungles, volcanic mountains, and legends older than any empire. It was here that 3 British explorers were sent on a mission that would forever alter the course of their lives. They arrived in the humid port of Batavia, stepping off a rusted steamship into thick air heavy with the scent of rain, soaked wood, and distant incense. The docks bustled with traders, fishermen, and colonial officers, but the moment the explorers mentioned the valley they planned to reach, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations quieted, faces darkened. Even the bravest locals avoided eye contact. Their expedition leader was Professor Alfred Winters, a man whose reputation stretched across European universities. He was tall, silver-haired, and utterly convinced that science could explain every mystery. Winters had spent the last decade studying giant bats across the world, and he firmly believed that the myths of Java were nothing more than exaggerated tales born from fear. Beside him stood Captain Graham Doyle, a hardened adventurer with scars that hinted at battles fought in deserts and jungles during the Great War. Doyle wasn't a man easily intimidated. He lived for Niger, perhaps even needed it. He carried himself with the steady confidence of someone who believed no creature on earth could outsmart him. And then there was Thomas Reed, the youngest among them. A naturalist barely 30, Reed documented every detail of their journey in a leather-bound journal. He had a quiet fascination with local folklore, but unlike Winters, he respected it. He listened carefully to the stories told by the villagers, the warnings carved into their memories. Within the first hour of arriving, the explorers learned the word that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. When Winters asked for guides, not a single man volunteered. Some backed away. Others shook their heads violently. One elderly fisherman grabbed Reed's wrist and whispered, "If you see its shadow overhead, you run. Do not look at its face." Reed felt a chill. Doyle simply smirked. Winters wrote the warnings down, not because he believed them, but because he thought they would make an interesting footnote in his research. With no local help, the 3 prepared to enter the dense forests alone. Their supplies included rifles, journals, surveying tools, specimen traps, and a heavy canvas tent. But what they lacked was knowledge. Knowledge that generations of villagers had lived and died learning. As they approached the edge of the jungle, the wind shifted. The trees seemed to lean inward, as if guarding secrets. Monkeys fell silent. Even the insects quieted. Reed glanced back one last time. The villagers were watching them with wide, fearful eyes, some muttering prayers underneath their breath. Captain Doyle placed a hand on Reed's shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "Myths don't kill people." Reed nodded. Though he wasn't convinced, Professor Winters adjusted his glasses and stepped forward into the shadows of the forest. "Gentlemen," he announced proudly, "let us make history." But the jungle had its own plans, and as the explorers disappeared beneath the towering canopy, a distant sound echoed through the mountains. The morning after they left the village, the explorers entered a world that felt untouched by time. The jungle canopy grew so dense overhead that daylight could barely slip through. The air was heavy, thick, almost liquid. Every breath tasted like wet bark and decaying leaves. For hours, they cut through vines and ferns that rose taller than a man. Strange birds circled above them, calling with sharp metallic cries. The deeper they walked, the more it felt as if the forest was swallowing them whole. Thomas Reed was the first to notice something wrong. "Professor," he called, brushing aside a cluster of vines. "You need to see this." Winter stepped closer. On the trunk of an enormous fig tree were long, deep claw marks. 3 parallel slashes carved into the bark. Each mark was nearly a foot long. Captain Doyle inspected it with his hand. "No cat did this," he muttered. "Not even a tiger reaches this high." Winters frowned but forced a smile. Possibly erosion, or perhaps a native using a tool. Reed didn't believe that for a second. The cuts were fresh, too fresh. As they moved deeper, they found more signs. Huge claw marks, crushed foliage, broken branches 10 feet above their heads, and faint trails in the mud that didn't match any known animal. Doyle became increasingly tense, scanning the treetops with his rifle ready. Reed wrote rapidly in his journal, his writing shaky. Winters noted everything down, though his confidence was beginning to crack. Hours passed, and the forest grew strangely quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of small animals, only the sound of their boots pushing through the mud. Then, just as the sun began to set behind the mountains, they heard it. A soft flutter at first. Then a heavy, dragging swoosh of enormous wings. Reed froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Winters nodded slowly. Doyle tightened his grip on the rifle. The sound circled them. Not above the trees, through them. Branches bent under the weight of something large moving overhead. Then came the scream, a long hollow cry that echoed through the valley and made every hair on their bodies stand on end. Oh. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. Not the roar of a predator. Not the call of a bird. Not the scream of a human. But a mix of all three. Deep, haunting, and filled with something impossible to define. The jungle responded instantly. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Every sound of nature vanished as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Reed whispered, terrified. "That's it, that's the Ahool." Doyle tried to steady his voice. "It's just some oversized bat. The locals exaggerate." But he didn't sound convinced. Winters stared into the canopy, his face pale. He had heard hundreds of animal calls in his career, but this one made his heart pound in a way he couldn't explain. They set up camp as darkness swallowed the jungle. The trees above shook again, this time closer. Reed swore he saw a shadow glide across the canopy, enormous and unnatural. The men stayed awake long into the night, listening to the forest breathe or stop breathing. Then, just around midnight, the scream returned. Louder, closer, almost right above them. "Ahool." Reed dropped his lantern. Doyle raised his rifle. Winters whispered, "This can't be real." But it was real, and the creature knew they were there. Dawn broke slowly, the first rays of sunlight barely piercing the dense canopy above. The previous night's screams still echoed in their minds, haunting them with every breath. Thomas Reed hadn't slept. Captain Doyle had sat with his rifle across his lap until morning. And Professor Winters, usually the calmest among them, had grown unusually quiet. As they packed their camp, Reed noticed something that made his stomach twist. Right beside his tent in the wet mud was a footprint. A massive, elongated print. Part human, part beast, with 3 curved claw marks digging deep into the soil. It was fresh. "Good Lord," Reed whispered. Doyle knelt beside it, measuring the size with his hand. "This thing walked right through our camp last night." Winters looked around the forest uneasily. "This is impossible, absolutely impossible." But whether it was or not, the tracks continued, leading deeper into the valley. Against Reed's protests, they followed. Gorge. By midday they reached a narrow gorge enclosed by steep cliffs rising on both sides. Mist drifted lazily through the air, illuminated by thin beams of sunlight. The sound of rushing water echoed from somewhere far below. "We move carefully," Doyle said. "This place is a trap if anything decides to attack." Reed nodded, his heartbeat thundering. Then, without warning, Winters raised his hand. "Stop, silence, only wind, only dripping water, only distant echoes." Then the shadows shifted. A huge, dark shape glided across the top of the gorge, casting a vast silhouette over the explorers. Reed looked up, and his entire body went numb. There it was. A beast unlike anything known to science. Wings stretching 12 to 14 feet. Broad and powerful, covered in coarse dark fur. Arms that bent like a human's ending in long, razor-sharp claws. A body thick and muscular like a primate. And a face, God, that face. Eyes large, black and reflective. A flattened nose. A jaw too wide, too full of teeth. A face disturbingly human, and monstrously wrong at the same time. The Ahool. It didn't flap its wings. It glided effortlessly, silently, watching them as it circled the gorge. Reed gasped, stumbling backward. Doyle grabbed his rifle but didn't fire. He was too stunned to move. Winters simply whispered, voice cracking for the first time, "No, that's not possible. It can't be, it's real." The creature banked left, swooping low. Wind rushed past them. Leaves scattered. Reed felt the air pressure shift as the wings passed overhead, and then, like a ghost, it vanished into the dense trees. Silence followed. A terrifying, oppressive silence. Reed collapsed to his knees, shaking. Doyle finally managed to speak. What in God's name was that?" Winters swallowed hard, his scientific certainty shattered. "It matches the descriptions almost perfectly. The locals weren't lying, they were understating it." "Kook. Riuzedioan." Reed's voice trembled as he said, "It was watching us, following us." Winters nodded. Doyle checked the cliffs above carefully, scanning every shadow. "That thing didn't attack," Doyle said slowly. "It could have, easily, but it didn't. Reed's eyes widened with fear. So what does that mean? Winters answered, barely above a whisper. It means it's studying us. The three men stood there, trapped between walls of stone and a canopy, hiding a creature that could strike at any moment. For the first time since the expedition began, Professor Winters felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. Not fear of the unknown, but fear of something very real, very intelligent, and very close. The sun dipped behind the cliffs. Shadows stretched like long fingers across the gorge. Reed clutched his journal tightly. "We need to leave this place," he whispered. But it was too late. The Ahool had found them. And it wasn't done.